right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight and for tuning in. This is Under Discussion at LTC, a free community discussion series that features a variety of topics here at LTC. My name is Razvan Stanescu, and I will be the moderator for tonight's discussion on worker solidarity. Tonight, we have three panelists representing three different organizations. At the end, we have IATSE 481, the Studio Mechanics of New England. In the middle, we have the Union of Adjunct Faculty, and close to me, we have the Graduate Employee Organization, which I'm also a member of. You can find more episodes of Under Discussion at LTC on LTC's YouTube, and learn more about LTC by visiting www.ltc.org or following at LTC Lowell MA on most social media platforms. All right, let's dive into the discussion. So I'm going to ask you guys to go one by one and introduce yourself and tell me about your union and who your members are that you represent. So if we want to start with Chris.
My name's Chris O'Donnell. I'm the business manager of IATSE Local 481. I've been the business manager for over 20 years now. I was a boom operator on movies and television productions before that. Local 41 is one of 360 roughly locals in the IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. About 160,000 members. It's an international because it's US and Canada. About half of those 160,000 members work in live event and theater. The other half work in motion picture production, including television and commercials and streaming and most whatever you see. Local 41 we are a studio mechanics local, which means that our jurisdiction is motion picture and television and streaming. That's what our members work on. We have 1,300 members, most of whom are out of work right now because of the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strike. We are, I think partly what makes us unique is that we are a freelance workforce. And we're project based. So all of our members are working, they may work on 3 or 10 or 12 productions in a given year, all under our collective bargaining agreements.
I'm Ellen Martins. I'm the president of the Union of Adjunct Faculty at UMass Lowell. We have the distinction of being the youngest union on UMass Lowell campus. We only organized back in 2010 and got our first contract in 2012. It's a great union, frankly. We are affiliated with UAW, which everyone thinks of as the United Auto Workers, which they are. We tend to think the 50 or 60,000 people who are academic workers, we think of them as the United Academic Workers instead of the auto workers. It works. We are looking at going into our third contract negotiations, and I'm getting ahead of myself. We have about 500 members.
My name is Dan Rourke. I am an officer in GEO, the Graduate Employee Organization. Razvan is our president, and we represent about 550, I believe, research assistants and teaching assistants. So we help run the labs and do grading. We do kind of half research, half teaching, basically. That leads to some, we're kind of transient workers because we're only there for 4 to 6 years. So that leads to some interesting organizing challenges, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But yeah, all graduate workers, also part of the United Academic Workers, UAW. Proud to see our union in an especially strong spot right now with the greater percentage of automobile workers.
Great. Thank you guys for your introductions. So just to zoom out for the audience a little bit, I want your guys' input on what exactly is a union to you. Just explaining it in as broad terms to a Main Street audience as you can. What does it mean to be a union? So beside being a collection of workers that represent the majority of the workers, how would you describe it?
I mean, other than what a traditional union is and how that's defined and is defined under the law, I would say that what's partly unique about the IATSE and specifically about motion picture locals like Local 41 is, like I said, it's a freelance workforce. So it's not as though everybody is showing up in one place and you see each other every day and there's you're working from project to project to project, and that way it might be like a painters union or a some of the construction union, and one of the main sources of continuity in the freelance workplace is the union. So the 80 trainings that we do a year, it's an opportunity for people who may not see each other to have, we're not just working under one collective bargaining agreement, but we're also, we have one place to go where we wouldn't normally do so because of the nature of the work that we do.
In hearing Chris, I realized that we have a lot in common because people say, what are adjunct faculty? Adjunct faculty is anyone who's not teaching full-time. And we are a separate union, but that means that there can be someone who's only teaching one course. There can be someone who's teaching up to 5 courses a semester. And we're on 2 campuses. And honestly, I wouldn't call it, it's not freelancing, but it is very much when we try to do we need to make our parties and our social events really good to get people to come, because very often our members are not only teaching at UMass Lowell, they may be teaching at Boston University, they may be teaching at Middlesex Community College, they might, because they're cobbling it together. This is part of how higher ed is. This is a ballpark, so don't quote me, but at least 80 to 85% of the freshman courses that are taught at UMass Lowell are by adjunct faculty. So we are really important on that first year experience. And that we're not unusual. That is what the industry is doing now. So I'm proud of my members for all the work that they do, and come to our next social gathering.
So what does unionhood mean for graduate students, Dan?
So I'm finishing my first year, so I'm relatively new to this. But I think that through bargaining, it just really seems like it's kind of the best attempt that anybody has made at trying to democratize the workplace, where today we're kind of like debating with the administration over how sick time should be defined or whether we should have sick time at all. And it, I think, just comes down to, normally it's a very top down. There's a few people at the top deciding what your work will look like, how your classes will be run, what kind of time you'll get, what kind of money you'll make. And it's the workers coming together and saying we deserve a say in that. And I think especially through things like strikes, which we're not allowed to do as public employees, and something that you can do through public opinion, but basically just trying to push your boss to take your opinion seriously and to have a say in what the workplace is like. And I think that workers know better than anybody usually what the workplace should be like. I've worked in places that companies that would have been more profitable for the owners had they let us make more decisions about how it was run. So I think just kind of giving yourself a seat at the table for how decisions are made.
So you mentioned bargaining in there, which is basically how unions work with the employers to reach contracts that are more beneficial. I just want to ask all of you, what exactly is the most important thing to your members in terms of bargaining, in negotiations? What do you see as the priorities for your members?
It actually is morphed, meaning our first contract, which was only in 2012, it had everything to do, ultimately, the umbrella we're under is respect and feeling valued. We had not had a raise in 10 years where everyone else on campus had, because we were not unionized and everyone else was unionized and someone was looking out for them. So when we organized our union, that was the whole point, that we needed to have the voice, and we needed to have a really strong voice in order to feel the respect and feel valued. Now it really gets down to, it really is working conditions and compensation, because that is the way any company shows respect for the worker.
So we have one major contract which covers probably 90% of the production our members work on. It's a national contract. It's negotiated by the international with all of the participating locals that work under that contract, which includes Local 481. So we're actually, our current 3-year term contract is up in a year, in next July. You may have heard about what happened in 2021 with us and with our, the other major contract is out of LA called the Basic Agreement. So those two units together nationally comprise about 40 or 50,000 workers, IA workers who work in motion picture and television. In 2021, we had 3 or 4 priority issues on the table that were there a month and a half after the contract expired. We had a strike authorization vote nationally for both contracts, which had never been done before ever, and then bargained a contract. We both came in within 32 hours of going on a national strike. Wow. Because we had identified 3 or 4 priorities that we were not going to walk away without. And by the way, we're negotiating with the same people that SAG-AFTRA and WGA is negotiating with, which is the MPTP, which is name a studio, name a streaming service. They're all members of that organization. And the priorities for us were really some of which we called just life-work balance issues, because we are also a unique industry that we routinely work 12 hours a day minimum, 5 days a week minimum, if not more. And so we were demanding better rest periods on a daily basis, better rest periods on a weekend basis, better overtime structures over after 12 hours, and the fact that better meal penalty violations, so that it actually forced employers to break people for a meal because it didn't cost them enough not to. And these were issues that were brought to us by our members and said, we need to fix this. And we didn't leave without fixing it. And we did. And I think, we've already created our bargaining committees for the next round of negotiations with the AMPTP in probably April or May. And I think it's probably going to be more about wages. I think it's going to be about compensation and about benefits and wages, because unfortunately our negotiations ended just before the real spike in inflation. And so I think we need to address that. And I think wages and some of the other working conditions and economics will be probably priorities.
Yeah, for context, in the past 2 years, inflation has been about 14% increase on the dollar value, which that's compared to 3 to 5% yearly.
Right.
So a lot of workers are feeling this nowadays. I'm curious, what is the priorities for?
Yeah, we have a pretty quantitative measure of that, because right around the time I started a year ago, Razvan and the other leadership sent out a survey to all 550 members, and I want to say at least a few hundred responded. And there are about 12 options, and there's a lot of things that they care about, a lot of kind of work conditions and things. But there's 12 options, and you listed them, how much you cared about them. And I think every single person to the person put stipend as their number one, just how much we're paid. Because the average, so we only cover students or workers during their 9 months of the school year. Most, I don't know about the percentages because we don't represent them, but a lot of RAs and TAs, research assistants and TAs get a summer contract, but that's not covered. So during the school year, the average stipend for a worker is a little over $19,000. And I don't know if you guys have tried to rent an apartment around here making, I'm on the step 1 right now. So monthly I bring in about $1,600 and rent is most of that. So that's kind of the number one thing right now. Getting better coverage on insurance, getting better sick time are things that definitely matter. But the number one thing that we're really putting most of our pressure on is just a higher stipend to keep up with inflation, like you're saying.
That makes sense. What about action? So these are sort of the priorities at the bargaining table for your members. What have you done outside of the bargaining table? What does action look like for your individual unions? Because each union, I feel like, has different ways that they act outside to influence their employers or public opinion. Can you talk a little bit about how that looks like for your union?
I'll start. For our second contract, everyone told us that the first contract is the hardest. I disagree because that took the first contract took 18 months and the second contract took almost 3 years. Because we were insistent that we were not leaving the table without some of our members receiving benefits and getting significant raises. So that was key. So we did rallies, we did petitions, we had the AFL-CIO doing some things for us. What finally turned the table, because it was exhausting, but while we were doing it all. So every hockey game, someone would be there. Every basketball game, someone would be there. I mean, we were very much in the face of the parents and of the students as well. But it wasn't until the tipping point of we were going to actually have a very big rally when Oprah came to town. Ooh. Oprah came to town, which was great on campus. Oh boy, 2015.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, and we'll probably talk about the pace of negotiations, but our negotiations really picked up because they really wanted to make sure, because she is pro-union, from what we were making contacts with her, and so we got a contract we could live with.
Excellent. Chris, go ahead.
Sorry.
It's a national contract, so much of that happens at that international level. Yeah. I will say that I think that it's fundamental to make sure that you're enforcing your contract after it's negotiated, and that you keep the employers honest, which is difficult. And so I think, I think we do a lot of training in our local around making sure that people understand what the contract is, and that it needs to be enforced in the common ways that it may not be. And because I think that strengthens your hand going into negotiations. I think the other part is that you need to survey not only the members and what their priorities are, but you need to see how for example, some of those gains that we made in 2021, how they impacted the workplace for better or worse. That can then give you a sense of what you might want to bargain for later, or how you may need to change it, because they're certainly doing that. So I think that's part of the preparation of going into bargaining.
Is that difficult, staying vigilant? Do you have different employers?
It's extremely difficult because, like I said, we're not one workplace. I mean, we may have 6 or 7 or 8 film or television productions happening at the same time, often they're all being produced under this one contract, this one national contract. I've been enforcing it for 20 years. I know it inside and out, but I have to make sure that the stewards do, and the department heads do, and everybody does. Because the other interesting thing about it being a national contract is I have producers come here all the time and say, well, they don't do it that way in Louisiana. Same contract, but they do it differently. They don't make us pay that. It's like, well, it's in the contract. You got to pay it. What can I tell you? So I think there's nuances to it also.
Excellent. What does it look like for grad students?
Yeah, I think ours is pretty similar to yours, since we're in the same school. And as I've already mentioned in mine again, it is illegal for us to strike in Massachusetts, and I want to say 26 other states, but I could be making that up. At the end of the day, 90% of what your employer cares about is that you show up to work. So the ability to withhold your labor, I think, is the most powerful tool. But since we don't have that, and not that illegal strikes aren't possible, but it'd be really logistically tough with our membership. The best thing you can do is public opinion from our perspective. That's what we're open to suggestions if anybody has any other ideas, but we have held rallies where we try to be really visible, like outside convocation for new students. We held a rally on, I think it was like some visiting day for potential new students over the summer, kind of outside of U Crossing, where we'd be seen by the most people. Try to get local media outlets to cover you. One big win recently, or not win, but at least might help, is that we were able to get Senator Warren and Senator Markey to post across social media calling on UMass Lowell to give us a fair contract and a livable wage. And we hope that being seen by however many hundred thousands of people will make a difference. So things like that, just kind of embarrassing the school and making sure everybody around them knows that they pay unlivable wages to the people who keep their classes running. And I think that's been our main strategy, is embarrassing them essentially.
Yeah, public opinion is powerful for a public school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, Chris, you were saying that the international takes care of a lot of the contract.
Because they are essentially negotiating and signing the contract. I mean, just to give you a sense of what the bargaining looks like, we go to LA, although in 2021 is all via Zoom, which I think is one reason why it took 4 months instead of 2 months, and we're determined not to let that happen again. But there's for our contract, the Area Standard Agreement, which covers pretty much everywhere but LA and New York. We've got 20 locals in our IA caucus, probably 50 people, and then the AMPTP has probably 60 or 70 people in their caucus, and then we meet in a room, and the international president sits at the head of ours, and then we're kind of spread out behind them, and same thing for the other side. And so it really is being run by the international, similar to what you got. In 2021, the contract expired at the end of July. We were still in bargaining. We didn't go back into bargaining, I think, until August. They had already finished the basic agreement, and it was looking like they were not moving on any of our priorities at all. We took the strike vote. The International's communications and political department went into high gear. We got a letter from, I think, 160 members of Congress, basically saying, written to the AMPTP saying, make a deal and treat these people fairly. So, we go and they've very much ramped up their social media presence. But they would typically handle that more than we would at that level because it's a national contract. I mean, we can do things locally. I know SAG-AFTRA right now are doing major things every week, including events recently with Senator Warren and Markey and others. So we have not been in a position yet where we've had to engage on that local level.
It's valuable for politicians to sort of engage.
Right.
But I'm curious, for us, for UAW, for adjuncts and for grad students, we do the bargaining ourselves. What does the negotiation room look like for adjunct faculty? Is it tense? How long does it usually take? Walk us through that process.
Well, it's interesting because we'll be going into our third. So what's it look like? Glacially slow at times.
Okay.
That's basically it. But I think it will be different this next time just because we're doing much more transparency. Well, always before it was a closed door. So it would only be the negotiating team. And at one point we had a negotiating team of 9. And the last time it whittled down to like 4. 9 was just wonderfully cumbersome. But with the transparency where we're going to have members either on Zoom or being silent, I think they're called silent negotiators, to be there so they can see how glacially slow it can be. I don't think it will be as slow. I know the people across the table have somewhat changed because there's been some retirements or promotions, but we will present our part so it gets down to we'll have X amount of proposals. So then you start discussing. Sometimes we'll only start with the easy things, we'll call it, and then you ramp up. We're exploring what would be best. But what happens is then they see it, they go into a caucus, we sit there like this, and we're caucusing, and then they come in and say no, and then and then we work from there. I'm hoping that we'll be able to jumpstart it where, give a proposal, things that are very easy to understand, give them ahead of time, and they can give us their proposals ahead of time. That hasn't been the norm, but I'm interested in exploring that because life is too short, and the longer you're out on not having a contract, the more time that your members are not getting that raise that they need for basic living.
That makes sense. So it's basically a system of proposal, counter proposal over many meetings.
Yep.
Dan, you as a new sort of member of the union,
Yeah.
how does this process seem to you, and what did you think beforehand, if you had any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't been in a bargaining room. I'd read books on unions, but not really been in one. But one thing I do really like about ours, like to talk about transparency, is that ours is the bargaining room is 3 or 4 people from the administration, and then our side is just you, me, Najifa, another graduate student, and Kathy Mellish, the president of UAW Local 1596. So she's there to kind of advise us and to say oh, this is normal, this is not normal, and also to catch things we might not, where they might give us wording on sick leave today, and there was something in there that I might not have caught that would have been kind of a loophole for them to not really give us what we deserved, and so she catches things like that. But for the most part, all the decision making, or entirely all the decision making, is up to us, the graduate students. Anybody can join the bargaining team. Anybody's welcome to join on Zoom and watch bargaining. Each week we have a meeting on Fridays where we talk about what we're going to, what kind of proposals, what we might concede on, things like that in the next week. Anybody's welcome to join. So yeah, it's very open. It's very, if anybody who's never been to a meeting shows up, because I get people are busy, they might show up and say, hey, I actually really need you guys to talk about this. We'll do that. And I think that makes such a huge difference, because even when unions are run by, professionals, which I think I get why that would be the case, because it can be helpful when when you're a lawyer, understands all of that. But I think that it's so easy to get into a rhythm of concessions where you're just oh yeah, you give a little, we give a little, whatever. And then because it's hard to say like we're stopping here and we're gonna try to really like build a campaign to get this last little bit. And so I think when you are the workers whose stipend isn't enough, you like realize like, oh, actually this is like, I can't really go much lower than this. So you're gonna fight a little harder instead of just being like, oh, this is the fair deal in the middle. But the deal they offered in the beginning wasn't, between the two wasn't perfect. So I think that it is a huge difference when you have workers making those decisions. And it's easier when you have a unit of 500. And, when you have a national, when you're negotiating a contract for so many people, it makes sense that it has to be a little more centralized. But
I would not want to be Carol Lombardini, who's the head of the AMPTP, because she's got 40 companies in there, many of whom I probably maybe shouldn't say this publicly, but you could assume they hate each other. I mean, they compete against each other, right? I mean, we have 25 locals in that room, and we do have different priorities and we do have different interests, but fundamentally we are part of a unified organization, and that's the way we have to appear, and that's the way we want to stay. It doesn't always happen, but it's like you said. I mean, we go into caucus and we're done caucusing in about 8 minutes. We won't hear from the AMPTP for 8 days, literally, because they can't make a decision because they're divided, and it makes bargaining with them very, very difficult. It can be difficult on our side too, because I may have a very strong feeling about some provision that the other locals don't, and I've had to say if I bring that home, I won't be here at the next negotiations. It's just not going to go over very well. It can be tricky, but it's frankly trickier for the other side.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm also curious, for a broader audience, a lot of times employers will try to paint unionization in a bad color. And there are people out there who still have some negative opinions about unions. What do you think about this perspective? And do you see any drawbacks to unionization at all in your experience?
Okay, so true confessions. I've been a union member since I was 16.
Wow. Congratulations.
Right. So my dad was a union president, so that definitely helped. So I got the idea early on that this is a good thing. I'm proud member of the American Federation of Musicians, and that's very much a freelance sort of everyone's cobbling together, or the majority of members of the Musicians Union are cobbling together a living. In your question. So I'm very proud of being union. We do have people who are very worried about joining a union, and I'm like, what's the downside? All I have to do is say, remember, we didn't have a raise for 10 years because we didn't have a voice at the table. And what's the term, like if you're not at the table, or if
you're on the table, if you don't have a seat at the table, you'll be on the table. Or something like that.
Ooh, that's a good expression. I like that.
I know there was more to it, but I'll let someone else join in.
Yeah.
So union, I see no downside. The hardest thing is when you are organizing a union, it is a rather treacherous when you physically go one person at a time and have them sign a card. At least that's the way it is in Massachusetts. Sign a card saying, yes, they want to be represented. And then you have to have it certified. During that time period, it can be dicey. There can be surprising people are let go, or there'll be retribution, and there are laws against that, but sometimes it's a hard thing to fight. But fortunately, we didn't. So go on. Refresh everyone's mind on what the question is.
The question was, employers will try to paint unions in a bad light, especially the big ones. Obviously what's happening now is SAG-AFTRA, but before that with Kellogg, and employers who try to prevent unions from unionizing in the first place. Just if you see any downsides that, or what you think of this bad opinion, because some people do share it themselves, not just, So what would you say to people who feel that way?
I think the only downside is for the people who own the companies, and there's no downside for the workers. So if you make your living by owning a company, then it is a downside for you for sure, because the workers will take some of that profit back into their own pockets for a livable wage. But I think if you're a worker, the only downside is it's a lot of work to constantly fight against employers to get your fair share. But I agree, I don't see any legitimate downside. I understand why there's a lot of lies about unions that are spread by bosses and owners that I can get, if you believe them, why you would think that. But I think that at the end of the day, no, there's no downside for workers.
I'm also curious, Chris, you've been a union member for decades as well, but the same union, IATSE. How has that changed over time? Have your priorities changed over time? Has the approach changed over time? What has your experience been, having been in it for so long?
Well, it's two parts to it. It's the worker part, and my current role is, the business manager of the union. Our industry is probably one of the most unionized industries in the country, quite frankly. And even in my early days of getting started in this industry, I kind of knew at some point I was gonna have to join or deal with the IA, because if I wanted a career in the industry, and I was lucky enough, I wasn't 16, but I was lucky enough on the second feature film I ever worked on Cape Cod in 1986, I'm dating myself, was organized by the IA, and I got a union card out of it. And then when Local 41 was chartered in 1989, and I became a member in 1990 and was either on the board or was a trustee or was involved in some committee ever since. And I think in addition to unions being a good thing, they're also what you make them in terms of an individual member's engagement in it. And whenever I see, and it's typically people that you are characterizing on the other side who refer to union bosses, just drive me crazy, because I don't feel like I'm a union boss. I'm elected every 3 years. I'm part of probably one of the most democratic institutions out there in America, other than the government itself. I mean, we are elected. We are controlled by the government, or by the Labor Management Reporting Disclosure Act. We're governed by, but it's just a very democratic institution, which I think is really, really important for people to understand. Yeah. And member engagement is really critical to that. And I think if I've learned anything, not only through my own engagement in the union, but now as in leadership of the local, how important and tricky that member engagement is, and how important it can be.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into individually what your experiences are in your specific unions, but one last question is, to people, would you say, what are common labor rights that people might not know that they have? Is there anything that you come across all the time where you want people to stand up for yourself because there's something that a union provides or is fighting to provide that people take for granted when they're not in a union mindset?
Well, there's the Weingarten rights. Everyone has, and we give out cards to all new members, and I always have them in my back pocket. Weingarten rights, and Chris, since you're the most experienced here, it's basically, if you're brought into the employer's office and you feel at all like your job is threatened, you can ask, is my job, should I be concerned? And they can say yes, or they can say no. Then you can stop the meeting, essentially. You can stop the meeting, say, I would like a union rep, and then we can continue this conversation. Just because it's always important to have another voice. And usually the union rep will probably know the contract far more than the member will, despite the amount of time that we educate. That's one thing I would say that's key.
So you wish people took advantage of union representation?
Yes.
Okay.
I did not know that, so that's new information.
Yeah, I really hate it when I hear after the fact.
Yeah.
Because that's a harder thing to, that's just a harder thing to deal with. Yeah. You didn't know that?
I didn't know. No, never heard of one guy. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to spread the news.
Perfect. Yeah. Love it.
So we at least for the IA, to be vital is to organize work, and that's true, I think, for any union. And we spend a fair amount of energy organizing mostly low budget feature production and commercial production, and we, sometimes succeed and sometimes we don't. But it's about making the workers, whether they're union members or not, and typically in those situations they may not be, and we have to get a majority card signed and whatever else. But it's amazing that they don't understand that they're actually it's unlawful to be considered independent contractors and not employees in that situation. If they don't know that, sometimes the employers don't even know that, or that, they have to pay overtime after 40 hours, or you can't work a flat rate without getting overtime at all. So that the industry has really gotten better in the last 20 years, but there's still a level of production that happens where the people working in it, in the classifications that we represent typically, but on a non-union production, they're being treated unlawfully, and that they have rights that they don't know they have. And I've filed complaints with the Attorney General for misclassification on jobs and weren't even under a union contract, because employers, production, they need to know that they're required to provide unemployment insurance, they're required to provide workers' comp insurance, they're provided to pay that portion of Social Security. That's their lawful obligation, and workers need to know that.
Yeah, I think that kind of just is like, we have very few, if any, worker rights without a union, because, so for example, like OSHA, and this might be a little niche for because I'm in labs a lot, but any job that has workplace safety issues, like I worked for 3 years at a company where it was a company of about 30 people. They've been around for about 10 years doing R&D of pretty dangerous stuff, and no safety officer at the company. Wildly wild. The worst safety infractions I've ever seen anywhere. I saw people get fired for complaining. There was nothing you could really do about it. Like, if you don't have a union there HR wasn't there to help us. HR was there to hear our complaints and then tell us that they're being fixed and they weren't. So I think a union can be there to actually allow you to make that complaint. First of all, just make that complaint without the fear of repercussion, because they'll be there to represent you, but also not only make that complaint, but force the employer to make the changes that need to be made. Because if not, even if you're willing to complain, you're putting your job on the line. And if you're fired, you may or may not be willing to fight that. But I think very few people understand the legal system, myself included, well enough to do that on their own. So I think that you basically have no workplace protections, even ones that are technically enshrined in law, without a union to enforce them.
Well, you're just more at risk of retaliation because you don't have a union to represent you. And that's, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting at home and I'm getting text from a member who's working on a non-union tiny little movie in Springfield or Worcester. And, the crew is complaining about it being unsafe. I have no standing. I don't have a contract. But they're like, what can we do? And I'm like, well, you have OSHA rights. So, and you have a right to do this and you have a right to do that. And I ended up actually having a conversation with the producer. Half the crew walked, and I said, at some point, you just walk, you leave. You don't have to work in it was all about safety. It was unsafe. It was some state location where the state basically said to the production company, yeah, it's risky. You're on your own if you go shoot down in that tunnel. There might be asbestos, there might be mold. And they went down there and they said, yeah, here's some N95 masks, good luck. Not identifying any hazards, not anything. And if that was a union show, they would have done that investigation. They would have found out what the hazards were, and we would have agreed on what the mitigation steps were to do it. And that's what I said to the producer. I was like, this is what happens when you do a non-union show. You just go half-cocked willy-nilly, and you're putting people at risk, and somebody's going to file a complaint. And that's what happened.
So contact your union representative.
Even though it was a non-union show. And I'm like, well, okay, all right, here we go. But it's like these poor guys, and most of the crew is non-union. They weren't members, but they needed support in what they needed to do. And it was a teaching moment for the producer, who's a non-union producer, for me to actually talk to that person and say, this is why you want a union contract, because you wouldn't have lost half of your crew on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah. Well, for any workers out there who are working somewhere where they're not unionized, Ellen, you as a member of the most recently unionized, what does that process look like to go from non-unionized to unionized? Walk us through it.
Well, first the first step that usually happens is the employer is the best organizer, because so when it gets bad enough, people are ready to take action. And it was bad enough so that people started taking action. People before me. I didn't come in during the card signing, where I was just at the tail end. So in Massachusetts, you have to have card signs, and you need to have at least 50% of the people who are on payroll to say yes, they want to be represented. Because then and so that happened. And there was one whole summer that there were 4 people who were diehards. They were fantastic because they would go down to, those on the South Shore, there's a lot of these tiny, tiny, tiny little villages that kind of, there's dirt roads. And I have a member who I know well, but I know he lives on one of those dirt roads. And he said, they came to my house. And I mean, they actually found me. That's the surprise because it's not on any GPS. I mean, and he said, I signed just because they asked, because they made the effort. And that really is the ultimate of union organizing is you make the effort, you make the contact, you make the relationship. And that's how you build a strong union. That's piggybacking on what Chris had said. So once it gets certified, once you have enough cards, then the management, in our case, UMass Lowell, and the union folks go down to, I think it's the state certification board. There might be a fancier name, but that's basically what they do. And they certify that everyone agrees, every single one of those cards are legitimate people and that they are on the payroll and they are working, which in our case, it worked. And then after that, then you have a party. Everyone had a party. And then you get down to the hard work. And for us, it was interesting because we were building a contract whole cloth. Like there wasn't a contract language to jump onto. What we did was we explored all the other adjunct faculty contracts, such as NYU and New School in New York, because they're also UAW affiliated. So we used some of that. And then we also went to our sister campuses of UMass, Dartmouth and Amherst and Boston. And so what language that they had that protected adjunct faculty and supported adjunct faculty, because they are all part of one big faculty union. So, but that was a good thing. I like to do research. I really love digging in. I felt like I was back at master's programs, I got a PhD in union organizing. So that's basically, and then you start, and then you're into the real work of negotiating that.
I've never been involved in the founding of one because we've been unionized since '96. But as a little earlier in the process at this job that was bad with safety issues, we would complain about it all the time. Like you said, your boss is the best union organizer, and we would all talk about like what we can do about it. And I would always make the case of like a union is really the only like ultimate thing that you can kind of do. And over time, because we would just chat about this a lot, like some people were very on board from the start. Some people kind of had to be like convinced of it. But I think even people who kind of did think like, oh, it's just a pain. Like you don't want somebody kind of like the boss's talking points. It's somebody in the middle, whatever. They eventually were like, no, like you're right. That is the only thing. And so they were a good amount of people said they would have signed cards. And then I reached out to, I didn't really know how to start. So I reached out to DSA has a labor subcommittee. So I reached out to the head of the ACT. I was like, he might know. And he put me in contact with somebody from some big CWA, big union, and talked to them. And they had said the first step is basically once you kind of have a parent union, hopefully one that kind of represents your industry, they will tell you to find like basically like a committee kind of, so like those 4 people, like the people who will kind of be the ones in charge of it and the face of it. So people who are willing to maybe have their faces out there being associated with it before you have the safety of having voted on it. And that was where we got caught up. I just couldn't get it. Was a small company, so there wasn't a huge pool to pull from. And the people I asked said like, if it gets to card signing, I'll do that, but I'm not super comfortable being like the face of it because this company had fired people in retaliation before. So we kind of stalled out there. But if anybody's wondering about like that first step, just try to find a union that represents your industry, or just reach out to any group that is labor associated, or one of us. I'm sure one of us could point you in the right direction. So just reach out to a union and they'll guide you the rest of the way.
That's a good point. So get unionized if you're not, or reach out to your union rep if you're. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Chris, so can you tell us a little bit, so the big story right now is SAG-AFTRA, the strike that's happening. Can you tell us a little bit about how that work slow and strike has affected other parts of the entertainment industry, especially your workers right now? Set the scene. What's happening?
Well, typically at this time of year, we might have anywhere from 5 to 10 feature films or television production shooting in Rhode Island or Massachusetts. We have none. We haven't really had any. I think we had The Perfect Couple, which is a Netflix series shooting in Cape Cod up through June, maybe. We have 1,300 members. There was probably a couple hundred members working on that. There was a TV show that was actually struck by the Writers Guild down in Rhode Island. Actually, the Writers Guild essentially shut down The Perfect Couple, and then Beetlejuice 2 was shooting, and that shut down prematurely as a result of the impending SAG strike. So really by mid-July, we haven't seen any major film and television work. And I don't expect we will. I don't expect we will probably till the end of the year. We do have some, you may have heard that SAG-AFTRA is granting interim agreement waivers for smaller productions that are not related to the AMPTP. So we have some of those, but they employ 20 to 50 people. So it's been, and it really was started off as a fairly slow year anyway, because I think actually the studios didn't ramp up into production anticipating that that these negotiations were gonna falter. So I have people that ran out of employment 3 months ago because they haven't worked since November. So it's really been all hands on deck in terms of trying to find resources and ways that we can alleviate and provide relief to the members. I just talked to one of the major equipment rental houses in Boston and Foxborough, and they basically laid off their staff last week, so they're down to one person. So that it's really having an impact we're not a production hub, but it's devastating Los Angeles, and it's devastating New York, and it's devastating Atlanta, which are probably the three main production hubs in the country. And there's probably 40 to 50,000 members out of work. I mean, we do have commercial production that's continuing. So I probably have 50 to 100 members who make a living in commercials, and they're getting by. But it's difficult.
That makes sense. Alan, I'm also curious, where is your union currently? I know it's a different story, but yeah.
So where we are right now, we should have been starting to negotiate a 3-year contract, but on Monday we have an important meeting. I'm trying to think of how many weeds I can get into and thread the needle through them. Governor Healy made an agreement with a coalition of public workers, all the state workers, that they would receive 8% raise for a 1-year contract extension. And they would also, there's 2 other pieces to it. Retro if they needed it, retroactive pay if they were off cycle, and also a certain pool of money for equity purposes to basically raise up the folks at the bottom of any of it. The thing is, we are not state funded. We are funded solely from campus money. I think probably grad students are the same.
That's right.
So after feeling very excited about that, we realized that we came back down to earth and realized, oh my gosh, we have to negotiate on this. Darn. And so that's what we're doing on Monday. I mean, we had already had a couple of meetings, and the university, they said, we're not sure this is going to work because we don't have, there's a budget shortfall at UMass Lowell. But there always is. Every 4 years, it's cyclical. It just has to do with capital debt that they're carrying. But anyways, that's my opinion. So we will get together on Monday. But for every single other state employee at the university, that includes our full-time faculty, our maintenance and trades folks, and all our clerical and support staff, they all got 8% raises. But the fact that my members are doing the same work as the full-time faculty. We are teaching. It's just I'm sure the university will be striving to do the right thing, I believe, especially since UMass Amherst, they are providing all the 8% raise for their adjunct faculty, and that's coming off their own campus money. So, and I'm hopeful. So once we get over that, once we square away that, then we get to have the fun of the 3-year contract negotiation. Yeah. But I am interested because the people across the table have changed. So I think dynamics might be somewhat different. Not saying good, bad, ugly. Just I kind of look forward to difference. And we're the folks who are doing the negotiating, where we've matured. I know a lot more now than I did in 2012. I have better relationships with a lot of people than I did, and so much of that pays out at the end. So I know employers have to do what they do. Union employees will do what we need to do as well.
So it's going to start.
That was much longer than you ever thought was going to happen.
No, that was great. Detailed answer. So it starts with this 8%, getting it fairly and squarely with all of your peers, and just like UMass Amherst has done it.
Right.
So it's like unfairness, but concentrated, as opposed to unfairness that's for your IATSE.
Well, and what's similar, of the three unions that was negotiating contracts with the AMPTP this year, one of them made a deal. The Directors Guild of America, DGA, made a deal. The other two did not. But they made a deal that may set a pattern for other. I mean, I think they made a 7%, 5%, 5% in each year of the 3-year contract. So we're all saying, okay, well, that's where the MPTP is headed on this, right? Or maybe, we would, like you would expect no less.
Right.
We're going to expect no less, and preferably more. But it's interesting. And the other thing that I would add, when you ask the impact also is that it's a very uncertain time now because we really don't know when this is going to end. I think.
Yeah.
And we don't know. There's two parts of uncertainty afterwards. One is a ton of production has gone out of the country and started before this happened. We don't know how this is going to impact our negotiations a year from, which will start, in earnest probably sometime next spring. I mean, like I said, we came in within 32 hours. We had to come within 32 hours of going on a national strike to get to some of those provisions that I talked about that were so important to us. And, it's interesting. It's going to be a very different climate this time around than it was in 2021.
So negotiations on the horizon, negotiations almost here. But negotiations are here for grad students. So
yes,
tell us what's going on.
So we started in March. So we've been going for like 6 months or so almost. And we have made progress on some things, but also, I mean, I don't know how into the weeds you want to get, but we made progress on some things. We've made concessions. They've made, I would argue, much fewer concessions, but some. The big thing, like I mentioned before, is if you ask, when I go up to grad workers and everybody on my floor knows I'm in the union because I bug them about it constantly. So whenever I show up dressed like this, because they know I'm in bargaining, and they ask how it's going, and they ask about stipend pretty much every time. So that's really what we're putting our effort into. And they've made movement, but I think they keep doing it in very small increments. We were doing it in small increments. We're trying to say we're trying not to move much more than we have. And so this is where we are kind of focusing more of our time, I'd say, on contract action team, getting these actions that will hopefully sway public opinion, instead of, we obviously still spend time deciding what we're going to concede on the next week, but we're making fewer and fewer of those. In the beginning, you put in a lot of things that you would love, but then would maybe be willing to trade away more. So in the beginning, we're trading away more. They're, trading away the things that they always knew they were going to, but saved to, seem better, I guess, after trading them for us. So it's fewer and fewer things now because we're kind of down to the things we really care about. They have given us the things that they'll give us easily. And now it's about kind of who cracks first, I guess, whether we kind of decide. And the tough thing is that because it's not like the auto workers who can say, okay, our contract is expiring, we're going on strike when that expires. If we reach a stalemate from, I forget what it was, 2011 to 2020 or something like that, for about 9 years, we went without a new contract because they had reached a stalemate. And I don't know the details of how that happened, but I would assume there were some things that grad workers weren't willing to give up. The university wasn't willing to give it, and it stalled. So that's something that is kind of in the back of our minds. Like, we, on the one hand, don't want to make concessions that we can't afford to make because we need our stipend to be a certain level. But we also don't want to just walk away without any raise and be stuck in the same position they were. So that's kind of where we're at, is towing that line between putting as much pressure as we can without giving too many concessions.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
I think philosophically, in my gut, in my heart, I believe that unions, we are the voice of morality. How is it right for all the other workers, for instance, except for grad students or let's say adjunct faculty, everyone else is getting raises. And, we had inflation somewhere in there. But it seems morally wrong to not bring everybody else in. And I recall early on, and no one will be named, but on some negotiations that I was in ages ago, I brought up the morality, and someone stood up at the table, banged the table, and said, "There's no room at this table for morality." And then we took a break. But I think everyone looked quite shaken because no one expected that, because we're people. We're in the same place. We all want the best thing for, let's say, whatever employer we're talking about. But it's important that all your employees, whatever they do for their work, feel valued and respected. That's the moral way. And that's the only way that you can justify paying people more.
It's a human rights work.
It's a human right, right.
Yeah.
But you get that through bargaining,
Yes.
working conditions, and other provisions that provide a dignified workplace, because they don't just give it to you. You have to bargain for it.
So I want to ask one more question from each of you before we go to asking questions from the public, if you guys want to. So I want to start with you, Chris. I had a question about how does the film industry benefit the New England area, since you're in this area that's not Atlanta, not New York, not Los Angeles? How do you see it locally?
I probably spent the last 20 years in the State House trying to answer this question. Because our industry, frankly, in Massachusetts and Rhode Island is fairly dependent on public policy, because we have the 35 other states have a film tax credit that incentivizes productions to come to Massachusetts and for businesses here to grow, which has happened. So I think it has impacts on multiple levels. One is it's a job creator, and it creates a lot of good, largely unionized, well-paying jobs with health benefits and retirement benefits. But it touches, the industry is somewhat unique because a production will come here and spend $40 million, probably half of it on labor, but the other half on businesses in the state for, everything. And they will, we did an economic impact study of Castle Rock season 1, shot up in Devens in 2017 and 18, and I think it touched, of the 351 cities and towns of Massachusetts, it touched 260 of them.
Wow.
Or some crazy number. I mean, it was because they need tents, they need food, they need the locksmith, they need everything. I mean, whatever you can think of, they need, and they want to do it locally because it's cheaper. And so it really is, it's an impactful industry. And then there's a kind of a tourism public relations piece that I think is also has value to the state, not only to people outside of the state, but to people inside the state who like the fact that that these productions are made in Massachusetts. So I think, and then there's the local businesses that are just, there's a prop house in Worcester that didn't exist 15 years ago. And in New England Studios in Devens, which didn't exist 10 years ago. And so there's been a lot of investment in the state around the industry, and it's now a recognized industry in the state. And so I think it's really had an impact on a lot of people's lives, including, when I started this job in 2003, we had 300 members. We now have 1,300. 500 of those probably in the last 3 years alone. So we've been able to kind of grow and give people an opportunity. And one other piece, which is the higher ed piece, and I have a lot of members who moved back here from LA or New York because they graduated from Fitchburg State or Emerson or BU or wherever, and they're like, there's nothing for me here. So and they've come back, but now a lot of the students we know for a fact, because many of them are members now, they're not having to go to LA. They're not having to go to New York. There isn't that brain drain that really, that they've now are able to stay here and work.
Wow. I'm going on to you, Ellen. I'm curious. You've been doing this job for a while, and as president, how do you see a parent union? What do you see that relationship between a union and a parent union? What has that meant for your union?
For us, we would never have been able to survive without the very active UAW Local 1596. Big shout out for them because they provided the expertise. We always have a lawyer at the table, as well as Kathy Mellish. We had one of the international reps there, especially in the first contract. Second contract, somewhat the same, but we also they were willing to go out on a limb. They could have said, or they could have, there were discussions, but they could have said, maybe you're asking for too much. They never said that. Instead, they said, we need to get hold of, is it 617 Media? We need to get some stuff up on the billboard as people are coming down on 93 so they can see. And it was very, it was very in your face. And they had organizers come on campus to help us organize because we're faculty. I mean, this is not something, we know how to talk in front of people, we know how to teach, we know how to, rev up, but we didn't know so much. And so they have been incredibly supportive. I know people sometimes look at the GEO people in us like, you're with the United Auto Workers, and we do call it United Academic Workers. Why aren't you part of like something called a teachers union? However, they do represent about 60,000 academic workers, whether it's adjunct faculty, whether it's grad students, they have the experience, and we have their backing. They are very active still with us. So that's our relationship.
That sounds really valuable.
It's incredibly valuable.
The experience, the support.
Right. Like Razvan and I are going to a summer session put on by the Region 9A of UAW, and it will have everything to do with sharpening our skills on how to negotiate, the laws involved, and we're bringing some members with us because it's important for the next generation whenever you graduate or I retire, and I don't really see that anywhere in the future right now.
Neither do I. So
we need to keep on working at educating our members because that's when you have a strong union.
Education, yeah.
Education. That is a true faculty member.
Oh, yeah. And Dan, what's going on now with grad students and where are they going? What actions are currently ongoing? By the way, if you want to plug our petition, I gave them an overlay to put the QR code if you
Love
want.
it. Yes, definitely sign our petition. It started, we started off getting specifically grad worker signatures so that we could say, look, over half of our members have signed this thing showing they have all these problems. And then after presenting that to the chancellor, we opened that up to anybody in the community to just show that there is not only support for us, but eyes on them so that like they know that they are embarrassed by how much they pay us. And we did the rally at the convocation. They basically like had the police come and tell us we had to stand much farther away than we had planned on. We couldn't pass out flyers.
Because it was littering.
Because they would be littered, which like they pass out flyers all the time. I think they don't want specific flyers, but they were ultimately embarrassed. If they thought they paid us a fair wage, they wouldn't care that we stood there passing out flyers saying exactly what our median stipend is. We're not like lying or making it seem like we make less than we do. The number's on there, and people can decide whether or not they think that's a fair thing to pay somebody who keeps your school running. Our petition is going where I'm going to be trying to draw attention to Markey and Warren's tweets. So we've been doing a little campaign of getting people to quote tweet it and tag the chancellor, the president, and the school to just make sure they definitely see those. And then, we just had that rally. So I don't think we have any other big actions planned now. I think we're hoping that will make somewhat of a difference in our coming negotiations, but we'll definitely be planning more. We also, something we've told the school is that we work to rule. So because we cannot strike, if I haven't mentioned that today, we are paid to work 18 hours a week, and that number is completely arbitrary. Like any PhD student in the country would tell you they don't work 18 hours a week. I worked full-time for 3 years between undergrad and graduate school, and this is every bit as much work as that. It's the same work. I'm just paid a lot less for it. So we are essentially, even though it would be very tricky to go on strike, it would be very, in the bargaining room, actually, somebody on the other side said that if anybody's ever working more than 18 hours a week, you should tell us. Nobody should be working more than 18 hours a week. And
I've heard that before.
That's preposterous. Like
They're working for free on their day off.
are you kidding me? Like,
I'm appalled.
They must love this. Yeah. So we're starting a work to rule, which is we will work 18 hours a week, and then we'll tell either the professor of the lab we're running, or if we're running our own class, or our professor who we're doing research for, okay, I finished my 18 hours for the week. I can't do any more. Sorry. And specifically trying to even frame it as like, not that we like working a ton of extra hours, but like we do, and we know that's part of what a PhD is. So we're just saying we're doing this until our stipend demands are met, basically, until we're paid. We're not asking for, it could be argued if what we're asking for is even a livable wage. It's a slightly bigger raise than they're offering. So I think it's super reasonable. And to just show them, like, if we didn't work a ton more than we're supposed to, the school wouldn't be able to run. So that is our kind of big action going on right now. Anything you guys can do, reaching out to UMass Lowell, letting them know if you're alumni or if you're students, letting them know that you are not happy with how they pay their workers, that would be great.
Good plugs. Thank you. All right. So we're on our final section of the night, which is asking for questions from you guys. I have a question right here. Yeah.
So you guys were talking a lot about unions being one of the absolute most democratic processes that you can kind of engage in. Obviously, you are the voice of the people for your members. How do you go about, especially thinking about the different sizes of unions that the three of you guys are representing? First of all, getting input from all of your members, what does that process look like? What kind of things do you engage in? And then also, how do you negotiate differences of opinion among members and kind of reach a consensus about what you're going to represent in bargaining or just in general?
Ooh, that's a very good question. So the question was, we talked about how democratic unions are. How do you manage that for unions of different sizes? How do you manage different people's opinions, and how do you sort of bring them together?
I think it's definitely easier when you're smaller. So I think that us being about 550 or so is a lot easier than something like IA. So we are able to, I'd say, something that I think you guys did that was great was before bargaining started, send out this survey and send it out a bunch of times because people are going to miss it. So just really get like as good. So we have, first of all, a ton of data that's just helpful. First of all, I mean, most importantly, like you said, for the democratic reasons, to show what our members care about most. Because like we know what we care about, but it's not always the same. And forget, like neither of us have families, for example. So people who have kids, there's, you want a family plan, stuff like that. So yeah, sending out a survey, which is a nice, easy way, but then having meetings with pizza is a great way to get people to show up.
For grad students, food is necessary for any sort of involvement.
So I think just hearing from people like that, and then as far as like, obviously that's helps you get your first kind of proposal on the table. But then after that, every week, it's like, what concessions do we make is kind of the hot topic and the thing where you do see differences of opinion. So we have a Zoom meeting every week where anybody can show up, and it's usually kind of like there's 4 or 5 leadership people, and then plus like another 5 or 10 people will show up depending on the week. And if there's like a difference, a lot of times we'll be on the same page, like, all right, we'll cut this, everybody cool with that, let's do that. If there's a disagreement, a lot of times we'll just take like an informal vote at the time. We'll be like, oh, do we want to go with this plan or this plan? All right, like this message if you want to do this one, like this one if you want to do this. So because we're small enough, we can kind of just do that very much on the fly. And we do, again, want to like have it be democratic and decide kind of who. And it's not really even so much like leadership versus everybody else. It's just a lot of times the leadership is split just as much as everybody else. So yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing. It's just having weekly meetings where anybody can show up and you can have some sort of informal vote to decide how you want to proceed.
Makes sense. What about you guys? What does it look like?
You guys ratify your contracts, right?
Yes.
Your bargaining unit.
Yes.
So we learned something in 2021. For our contract, the Area Standard Agreement, the members didn't ratify. We didn't ratify the contract. It was ratified by the International General Executive Board. So in 2021, the international president decided, because we had our first strike authorization vote by both the LA unit and our unit, it was decided that we should both, and the LA unit has always ratified their contract, it's in the Constitution, that we would both ratify our contract. So suddenly we went into the whole bargaining process not knowing that our members had to ratify the contract. And I will, I used to consider our executive board, which is our elected of 16 positions, as kind of our bargaining committee, and I would pretty much do most of the work preparing for bargaining and going to the bargaining with the IA and all the other locals, and that's the way it worked. We learned that model wasn't going to work anymore because now we have to ratify our contract, and so you need buy-in from the very beginning. So that's why, even though we probably won't go in with the AMPTP probably until our ASA maybe in April, maybe May. I have a 16-member bargaining committee. We've been meeting. I've been informing the executive board. And for me, it's like a bargaining committee. We represent 13 different crafts: grip, electric, sound, costume, construction, everything. So I need to have it well balanced and make sure that they're understand what they do. And now we're deciding our process, which is, I'm providing history classes to the membership on this contract because, quite frankly, most people don't even understand the contract. Educating the members is going to be critical to the success. So we're doing a lot of educating, not only the bargaining committee, but the membership of the contract itself. And then we're going to do a survey, at least one survey. The local is about trying to identify priorities. The international is going to do a survey to the entire two bargaining units of 50,000 people. We've already had, the international has provided actually a 4-hour bargaining training required by all, because every local is doing what we're doing. They're all creating their own bargaining committee. So you're required to do a bargaining training. This is all based on what we learned in 2021. And so we're going to have a survey, and then we'll probably have town hall meetings, which will be a shit show. Most likely in some cases.
This is a family show. No.
But you can bleep that out. Sorry. It's a technical term. And from that, we will come up with hopefully a consensus, certainly within the bargaining committee, and hopefully within, because that's what it's all about. It's coming up with a consensus with those people who are charged with surveying the members and deciding what our proposals are going to be. And then we give those to the international. And then the international has to take probably at that point 1,000 proposals from 30 different locals and come up with the proposals that are going to end up going to the AMPTP. So, but it's a very different process that has been, I've been to every single one of those negotiations since 2003, 6 of them. And this is the first time that we're really, our local and really all the locals are going through that process. It's difficult. It's hard because not everybody feels the same way about whether we should be fighting for better daily turnaround or an 8% increase in wages. And so, that in the bargaining committee is finally getting the idea that they got some work to do, and we all do, and it's hard work.
Ellen, democracy
in motion.
It's not easy,
right? Democracy is messy. It's not, you have to participate though. So the biggest thing that we do is surveys, and a couple of surveys. And then we dig down from what we learned from the first survey, then we dig down into deeper. And it's interesting because the adjunct faculty stem from people who are only teaching 1 or 2 courses, to people who have their own businesses, to people who don't need the money, to people who are desperate for the money. Yeah. I mean, it's the full spectrum. So when we have people saying, well, you don't have to bargain for that. I mean, that's not really important. And I'll have to bring up, and it comes down to conversations we'll bring up. So this is talking about the membership, that, no, this is important. Like, we do need to get dental insurance this next time around because it's killing anyone who's over a certain age or have kids, either way around. We need it. And they're like, no. I'm like, yeah. And I was born to argue, I think. I have a large family, and so that's the only way you could get, be at the table. But there have been tense moments when it's the bargaining team, and supposedly we are united when we're at the table. But the hardest part was we were in mediation for one of the contracts. And it was a great lesson in, okay, these are the priorities. And there's somewhat an outside voice. It was an outside guy who specifically does interest negotiations. And he just said, all right, so how many people really do want this? Where do you guys prioritize? And he would make us prioritize. And it made it so that, yes, people stormed out of the room who were part of the bargaining, but then they came back. I mean, it was all on our side because people get hot. I mean, I walked out saying, I think I need a break before I do something drastic. But in the end, it's better that you argue as a team and get to that place of consensus of where is the best good. And that really was the straight line. Where can we do the best good? And there is a place where you say, okay, it is enough for now. So anyone who's thinking that they're going to be bargaining, just remember you cannot fix all the errors in the first contract in the second contract because you don't know. It was something you said early on. Like you think it's a very strong contract, and it is, and it was. But then we tried to fix every little thing, and we realized, oh, that's why it took so long. So it's a learning curve. I hope that explains everything.
No, that's a great point.
Enough.
I think surveys are a great way to gauge people's priorities, and I think that that's an interesting method you use with the mediation sort of. Yeah.
Well, it was necessary.
It's necessary
Right.
to get to a
Right.
consensus.
But the busy time for adjunct faculty union is the week or two before classes begin and the first couple of weeks of class. And so my phone's been really busy.
That would be now.
That would be now. Exactly. So I thought I would take a break and be here.
Excellent.
Right.
So,
But, emails are going through the roof as far as people saying, is this my right? Is this what I'm supposed to do? Is this correct? And I like it when people ask. And then when you can also then turn around and say, well, this is our goal for where we're, when someone wants, it was some niche that they thought they should have more funds. And I was like, this is our goal, that we're using work on the base and then everything else. And they wrote back and said, oh, thank you for the lesson. Good point.
nice.
So that's all I have.
Work on the base. All right.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, we have 3 questions. Okay, we'll do rapid response. So if you want to come one at a time. So let's keep it to like 2-sentence response from each person.
All right.
Okay.
Deal.
Okay.
For the grad students in terms of work to rule, I know that, graduate students work closely with your professors. How have you seen, like, the responses from the professors? Are some like, well, when I was a student, I didn't have all these rights, so you shouldn't complain? Or have you found that they are a lot more supportive than you expected them to be?
Great question. So we actually are going to do a training for our members this coming Friday. So that is something we've announced to the bargaining team as a watch out, this is coming. But I think we'll be starting it in at the beginning of maybe the following week after next, something like that. So we haven't started it yet. I do expect there will be some of both of those though. I think my professor, I'm very lucky. He's very supportive of the union. He likes when I tweet about the union, but asks about how bargaining is going and stuff. And so I think if I tell him we're doing this until we reach a fair contract, he'll be like, yeah, I get it. But there are trouble PIs who, in general, I think I can guess will have problems with this and will say that, yeah, exactly like you said. When I was a grad student, it wasn't. We worked and we walked uphill both ways, and we didn't make any money and. Yeah, your $200 stipend was worth more than mine is now because of inflation. So anyways, so I'm sure that we will see some of that, but stay tuned.
We're emphasizing that PIs are our friends and that they can help us talk to higher up people, let them know our strife.
I'm hoping we'll see more of that than the other side of it,
Next question, please. Dan. Or anonymous next guest. Okay.
I had 2 quick questions, actually. The first was for Chris. I feel like I've seen a lot of people talking about the granting of is it interim contracts or as a strategy. I've seen people saying that they think it weakens the position of striking workers, but I'm always wary about hearing opinions about certain actions in an industrial dispute from people who aren't in that industry. So I was wondering if you had feelings on that and how it might move this.
I'm going to be very careful because I'm not. I talk to the SAG rep routinely for New England, and and it's a strategy they've picked, and I don't really have an opinion on it. I mean, I can imagine the IAA maybe having a similar strategy, because part of the strategy is you're forcing employers, although they're not AMPT employers, basically to work under the contract that the AMPTP is refusing to negotiate. So the strategy being, hey, if these guys can do it, why can't you? And these guys are small producers. Why the hell can't you do it? And that's a compelling strategy. But there's a flip side to that, which we've heard also. And I don't know where the right side of that is, and there's value to both.
That was on interim contracts. Thank you. Follow up.
Yeah, really, actually, just for the folks in the UAW here, I know that it's in the news right now. The UAW's contract with the big three automakers is up in a week, next Thursday. And I'm wondering, as people in the same union but in a different field, in a different industry, what does it look like when people within your union are involved in that kind of a dispute as folks working in the sector?
Ellen, you were just talking to us about the UAW and the big three.
Well, the UAW is expecting to get 46% increase. So what that does is that makes me feel pretty good about only getting 8%. I mean, if we're able to get 8%, I think they're bargaining strong, and they have the strength, and it's legitimate. I mean, they made a lot of concessions during, I think it was, I forget which era, but the two terrible eras that we recently passed. And they're trying to make it so that it all gets down to living wage. So are we directly related only in the fact that we're UAW? I think I've had a petition come my way. I regularly get a newsletter. Now it's up to once a week because we have fairly new UAW national and international boards. So they are much more active and much more, so it should prove interesting. But whatever wins they can get for their members, I support them 100%.
I think you can get as involved as you want to be, basically.
Yeah.
Like, I think that if you are kind of outside of it, you could basically not know what's going on. But also, like, if you follow the newsletters and want to show up to those things, it's kind of just, whatever you want to do, basically, yeah.
All right, thank you.
I just want to add that it's still incredibly important that at least the IATSE and our members support SAG-AFTRA and the WGA, and we do. And it's hard and it's a struggle, but I think it's really important that we have that solidarity, notwithstanding whatever SAG-AFTRA is doing, and that they think is their best methods of dealing with it. And because we face the same employers, and we're next, so we may need their support. And we will, along with the other, unions, whether they're in the industry or not.
All right. Thanks, everyone, so much. Thank you, Chris O'Donnell from IATSE. Thank you, Ellen Martins from UAF. And thank you, Dan Rourke from GEO at UMass Lowell. I've been Razvan Stanescu, and that's our show. Thank you so much.